The Galactic Institute of Cognitive Sciences stood as a monument to intellectual achievement, its crystalline spires reaching toward the violet sky of Centauri Prime. For 3 centuries, it had been the premier testing ground for the galaxy's brightest minds. Professor Zorak, a distinguished Thalmarian scholar with 6 computational lobes and a reputation for breaking the spirits of overconfident students, had administered the Institute's legendary puzzle sequence to thousands of candidates from hundreds of species. None had ever completed more than 60% of the trials, until today. Professor Zorak's eye stalks twitched nervously as he observed the small human child through the observation panel. Lena sat cross-legged in the testing chamber, her diminutive frame barely filling the chair designed for full-grown beings. She couldn't have been more than 7 solar cycles old by human standards, a mere infant by galactic measures. Her species had only joined the galactic community 2 generations ago, and most civilizations still considered humans to be primitive newcomers, barely evolved beyond their violent tribal origins. The first puzzle materialized before her, a 4-dimensional spatial lock that required understanding of non-Euclidean geometry. It typically took Centaurian postgraduates, with their mathematically oriented neural structures, approximately 43 minutes to solve. Lena tilted her head, her dark eyes scanning the holographic construct. Her small fingers moved through the air, rotating impossible angles. 12 seconds later, the lock dissolved with a harmonic chime. Professor Zorak's primary heart skipped a beat. A fluke. It had to be. The second puzzle emerged, a chromatic sequence based on quantum probability waves. Lena hummed softly to herself, a tuneless melody that seemed almost random. Her hands danced through the light patterns. 20 seconds, solved. Impossible, Zorak muttered, his vocalization appendages trembling. He activated his communication device. Control, verify puzzle integrity. I'm detecting anomalous completion rates. Integrity confirmed, Professor, the control room responded. All systems functioning within normal parameters. The third puzzle appeared, a linguistic cipher that combined 17 extinct languages with mathematical proofs. This one had stumped the previous record holder for 6 hours. Lena leaned forward, squinting at the symbols. She began writing in the air with her finger, her lips moving silently as she sounded out alien phonemes that should have been impossible for her human vocal structure to even conceptualize. 2 minutes and 37 seconds. Professor Zorak stood abruptly, his chitinous legs scraping against the floor. He had to see this for himself. He entered the testing chamber, his towering form casting a shadow over the small human. "Child," he said, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into standard galactic common. "How are you solving these puzzles? What computational method are you employing?" Lena looked up at him with innocent eyes. "I don't know what computational method means, Professor. I just see the patterns. They're like games my mom plays with me." "Games?" Zorak's confusion was evident in the purple flush spreading across his exoskeleton. "Yeah, like when we do jigsaw puzzles, or when Dad tells me stories and I have to guess what happens next, or when I help my teacher sort blocks by shape and color." She smiled brightly. "These are just fancier versions of the same things." Zorak felt his academic worldview tilting on its axis. But the 4-dimensional spatial lock requires advanced understanding of theoretical physics. You manipulated 17 axes of rotation simultaneously. Lena shrugged. It wanted to open like a flower. I could see which way the petals needed to unfold. And the quantum chromatic sequence? That requires calculating probability matrices across multiple timeline branches. The pretty colors wanted to dance together, Lena explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the universe. Some colors are friends and some aren't. You just have to help them find their partners. Professor Zorak was silent for a long moment. In all his years of research, he had encountered many forms of intelligence. The hive mind processing of the keepers, the crystalline logic of the silicates, the temporal perception of the chronarchs. But this was something entirely different. "Continue with the sequence," he said quietly, returning to his observation post. Puzzle after puzzle materialized. Gravitational paradoxes, metamathematical proofs, dimensional mazes, molecular configuration challenges. Lena approached each one with the same innocent curiosity, often chattering about how the puzzle reminded her of something from her Earth childhood. A kaleidoscope, a song her grandmother sang, the way rain formed patterns on windows. When she solved the temporal recursion puzzle, a challenge that had never been completed by any being in the Institute's history, in under 5 minutes, Professor Zorak realized he was witnessing something that would reshape galactic understanding of intelligence itself. Humans, it seemed, didn't process problems through raw computational power or specialized neural adaptations. They recognized patterns through metaphor, solved complex challenges through play, and navigated impossible scenarios through something the galaxy had never properly valued: imagination. After 3 hours, Lena had completed every puzzle in the standard sequence with a 98% success rate. She yawned, stretching her small arms above her head. "Is there more?" she asked. "These were fun, but I'm getting a little tired." Professor Zorak entered the chamber again, this time approaching with something akin to reverence. "Lena, do you understand what you've accomplished today? You've broken every record in this institution's history." The little girl's eyes widened. "Really, do I get a gold star?" Despite having no concept of human educational reward systems, Professor Zorak understood the sentiment. "You get much more than that, young one. You've proven that humanity possesses a form of intelligence that the galaxy has never encountered. Your species doesn't just solve problems, you transform them into stories, into art, into play." He paused, his eye stalks focusing on her with new understanding. "For centuries we've measured intelligence by processing speed and logical precision. But you humans, you see connections where we see only data. You find solutions and creativity where we find only equations." Lena smiled. "My mom says that's because humans are good at making friends with ideas." Professor Zorak would spend the next decade studying that simple statement. It would become the foundation of an entirely new field of cognitive science, one that finally explained why humanity, despite being one of the youngest species in the galaxy, had become one of its most innovative. As Lena left the testing chamber, holding her completion certificate that she would proudly show her parents, Professor Zorak sat in his office staring at the data streams. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, had seen them as primitive and impulsive. But perhaps that very primitiveness, that closeness to play, to story, to wonder, was humanity's greatest strength. The professor began drafting his report, already knowing it would send shockwaves through the academic establishment. On human cognition, why imagination may be the universe's most powerful computational tool. In the end, it wasn't about speed or precision. It was about seeing puzzles not as obstacles but as invitations to play, and no species in the galaxy played quite like humans.